In the cold, unforgiving territory of the Frost-Bane Pack, the hierarchy was absolute, and Elara lived at the very bottom of its jagged, ice-covered peak, while her stepsisters, Drusilla and Vane, spent their days preening in front of silver-leafed mirrors, draped in the finest silks, and dousing themselves in expensive lavender oils to hide their natural musk. Elara was relegated to the coal cellar and the grease-stained kitchens. Her crime was her wolf, or rather, the lack of a proper one. When she had finally shifted at 18, a moment that should have been her triumph, she hadn't turned into a sleek, powerful predator like her sisters. Instead, a small, scruffy creature with patches of uneven fur and mismatched eyes had emerged from the transformation. The pack elders had laughed until they wheezed, labeling her a Mutt, a biological mistake that brought shame to her stepmother's noble household. From that day on, she was treated as less than a wolf, a servant to be kicked aside and ignored, a blemish on a family that obsessed over blood purity and status. She was the ghost in the halls, the girl who cleaned the hearths while the warriors sang of glory, her own voice silenced by years of systematic cruelty. She had learned to move without making a sound, to breathe without drawing attention, and to hope without letting the light of that hope reach her eyes, where her stepmother could extinguish it. Every day was a cycle of labor, hauling heavy water pails through the snow, scrubbing the blood of the hunt from the great hall's stone floors, and enduring the sharp pinches and whispered insults of her sisters as they passed her in the corridors. They treated her like a beast of burden, a creature without a soul, unaware that the small, scruffy wolf they mocked was merely a veil, a divine shield hiding a power so immense it would have incinerated their primitive minds had it been revealed too soon. Before we dive into today's incredible journey, I want to see how far our pack reaches. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Are you watching from the snowy north or the sunny south? I love seeing our global community grow. The news of the Alpha King's visit had sent the village into a state of manic preparation. Alpha King Varick was a man of shadow and iron, a warrior whose scars told the story of 100 conquered territories. He was the ultimate alpha, a male whose power was so absolute that even other alphas lowered their heads in his presence, their wolves whining in submission before he even spoke a word. He was coming to the Frost-Bane Pack to find a mate, a woman worthy of sitting on the obsidian throne. Elara's stepmother had spent a fortune ensuring Drusilla and Vane looked like goddesses. Every jeweler in the territory had been drained of their finest silver, and every seamstress had worked through the night until their fingers bled to create gowns that shimmered like the northern lights. They draped themselves in pearls and rare white fox furs, hoping to mask their average spirits with royal luxury. "He will want a warrior queen," the stepmother hissed, tightening Vane's corset until the girl gasped for air and her face turned pale. "Not a scruffy embarrassment like Elara. Lock her in the cellar. I won't have the king's first impression of this house ruined by a mutt. If he smells the stench of failure on you, he will never choose one of my daughters. You are to stay in the dark where you belong until the king's carriage is out of sight. You are a stain on this family's honor, and I will not have you scrubbing the floors when a king walks upon them. If you even let out a whimper, I will ensure you never see the sun again. You are nothing but a mistake of nature, and the king has no room for mistakes. Your presence would be an insult to his bloodline, a reminder of the weakness we strive to purge." Elara didn't fight back. She had learned long ago that silence was her only shield against their venom. As the heavy iron bolt slid into place on the cellar door with a final, echoing thud, she crawled onto a pile of rough burlap sacks, the smell of coal dust and damp earth filling her lungs. Her scruffy wolf, the one they called a mistake, began to pace in the back of her mind. It wasn't the frantic, panicked pacing of a caged animal, but the rhythmic, heavy tread of a predator waiting for the moon to rise. She could feel the earth itself vibrating beneath her, a low hum that seemed to answer the steady beat of her heart. For the first time in years, the mutt didn't feel small. It felt concentrated, like a star collapsing into a black hole. It was as if all the years of being stepped on and ignored had compressed her spirit into something incredibly dense, something that was finally beginning to push back against the world. Her skin began to itch, a strange heat radiating from her bones that she couldn't explain. She realized that her mother, who had died when she was young, had always whispered to her to keep the fire small until the night is darkest. She had never understood those words until now, as the heat grew into a roaring furnace within her chest. The coal dust around her began to swirl, caught in an invisible vortex of energy that defied the laws of physics. As the royal procession arrived, the ground itself seemed to vibrate with the power of Varick's guard. 100 black-armored warriors on massive, battle-scarred wolves rode through the village, their presence turning the air heavy with the scent of ozone, ancient forest, and raw authority. Elara watched from the rusted iron grate of her cellar, her face smudged with coal dust and her heart heavy with a strange, pulsing ache. The vibrations of the horse's hooves seemed to sync with her own heartbeat, sending jolts of electricity through her limbs. In the dark, her scruffy wolf began to whine, but it wasn't a sound of fear. It was a sound of ancient, bone-deep recognition, a call echoing across centuries. It was the sound of a key finally meeting its lock. The air in the cellar grew cold, then hot as her blood began to sing a song of war and starlight. She felt a pulling sensation in her chest, an invisible thread connecting her to the presence moving above ground. The stone walls around her seemed to pulse with a silver light that only she could see, a glow that emanated from her own pores and reflected off the soot-covered floor. This was the moment of her awakening. The breaking of a 1,000-year-old seal. Above her, the great hall was filled with the scents of 100 eligible females, all trying to project strength, fertility, and beauty. The air was a suffocating mix of floral perfumes and desperate pheromones. Kale, the local alpha, stood at the entrance, his knees shaking as he bowed so low, his forehead nearly touched the cold stone as Varick entered. The king was a giant, his eyes like pools of liquid gold, scanning the room with a look of utter boredom. He walked past the noblewomen as if they were made of glass, his nostrils flaring as he searched for a scent that didn't smell of desperation and cheap perfume. He sought something wilder, something that smelled like the dawn of time, something that whispered of power older than the packs themselves. Every step he took resonated through the floorboards, reaching down into the cellar and vibrating in Elara's very bones. He was a man who had everything, wealth, land, and an army, but he was empty without his soul's counterpart, the legendary Lunar Sentinel whose return had been prophesied in the stars. Drusilla stepped forward, her chest puffed out, trying to project the aura of a high-ranking wolf through sheer force of will. Varick didn't even stop to acknowledge her existence, moving past her like a ghost. Vane tried to catch his eye with a practiced, seductive smile, tossing her hair so the silk of her gown caught the firelight. He walked right past her, as if she were a shadow on the wall. "The moon has not spoken," Varick growled, his voice a low tectonic rumble that made the windows rattle in their frames and the wine in the guests' glasses ripple with the force of his command. "Is this all your pack has to offer? False scents, hollow spirits, and painted faces. I am looking for a mate, a partner who can stand beside me in the storm, not a doll to dress in lace. I seek a soul that burns as bright as the northern sun. I seek the scent of a queen, and all I find here is the stench of pretense and the smell of fear disguised as ambition. Do you think I am a fool to be distracted by silver and silk? My mate is not in this room, yet I feel her pulse beneath my very feet. Explain yourselves." The stepmother scrambled forward, her voice high and panicked, the silk of her sleeves rustling like dry leaves. "Sire, we have the finest bloodlines in the north. My daughters are descendants of the Great Fang. Their lineage is pure, untainted by the weak. Perhaps the journey has dulled your senses to their quality? Surely one of them is destined for your throne. They have been trained since birth to be Lunas. They know the protocols of the court and the strategy of the hunt. We have kept our line pristine, weeding out the failures. Varick's head snapped toward her, his eyes flashing with a predatory golden light that made her stagger back and trip over her own heavy velvet gown, sprawling into the dust. My senses have never been sharper, and right now they are telling me that the true queen of this pack is being hidden in the dirt like a secret crime. I smell a scent of lilies and lightning, and it is coming from beneath my feet. You hide the divine and offer me the mundane. You try to sell me a candle when I have come for the sun. Where is she? Answer me before I tear this hall to the ground. He didn't wait for an invitation or a guide. Varick followed the scent, a scent that cut through the perfume like a silver blade, straight to the kitchens, through the terrified servants who dropped their trays in his wake, and down the narrow, dark stairs to the cellar door. The stepmother tried to block his path, her face pale as a ghost and her hands shaking. Sire, please, that is just a servant, a broken thing, a mutt that shouldn't even be called a wolf. She is a deformity of our bloodline, a mistake we keep for charity's sake. She is nothing. She is dirt. She is not fit to be in your presence. She will only offend your eyes. Her existence is a tragedy we hide to spare you the sight of it. Varick didn't speak. He simply placed a massive calloused hand on the heavy oak door and ripped it off its hinges with a single violent motion that sent splinters flying like shrapnel into the stone walls. Elara stood in the shadows, her tattered dress covered in soot, her mismatched eyes wide with terror. But as Varick stepped into the damp, dark room, the mutt wolf inside her let out a roar that echoed through the entire village, shaking the foundations of the pack house and silencing the music in the hall above. It wasn't the yip of a scruffy dog. It was the thunderous roar of a lunar sentinel, a wolf so rare and powerful it hadn't been seen in 5 centuries. The ground cracked beneath her feet as her power began to overflow, the coal dust around her rising and swirling in a miniature cyclone of energy. Her scruffy appearance began to melt away, her skin clearing and her height increasing as the royal blood within her finally claimed its rightful place. The mismatched eyes began to glow with an intense, unified violet light that pierced the darkness of the cellar like twin stars. The scruffy, unkempt fur had just been a shell, a chrysalis designed to hide and protect a spirit that was too bright for the world to see before its time. As the light from the hall hit her, the scruffy patches of fur on her arms began to shimmer, turning into pure, radiant silver. Her tattered shift seemed to transform as her aura expanded, a majestic silver light cloaking her like a gown of stars. The soot on her skin vanished, replaced by a complexion that glowed like polished alabaster. Varick dropped to one knee in the coal dust, a gesture that made the guards in the hallway gasp in shock and drop their weapons to the floor. His massive hand reached out with surprising tenderness to touch Elara's cheek, wiping away a final smudge of soot. "They called you a mutt," he whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion no one had ever heard from the Iron King. "Because they were too small to see the goddess beneath the skin. They tried to bury the sun in a cellar, but the sun always rises. I have searched 5 lifetimes for this scent, and I will burn this world to cinders before I let them hide you again. You are mine, and I am yours. Forgive me for leaving you in the dark for so long." He stood up and lifted her into his arms, wrapping her in his royal black fur cloak, which smelled of cedar, power, and home. As he carried her out of the cellar and into the great hall, a silence fell that was more deafening than any roar. The stepsisters fell to their knees, their own wolves whimpering and tucking their tails in the presence of a true queen. Drusilla and Vane watched in absolute horror as the girl they had mocked and beaten was elevated above every noble in the land. The jewels they wore suddenly felt heavy and cheap compared to the silver light radiating from Elara's skin. The pack members who had once thrown scraps at her now couldn't even meet her gaze, their heads bowed in a mixture of fear, shame, and awe. They realized that they had been treading on a miracle for years, treating a savior like a servant, and that the Mutt they had ridiculed was the very being meant to lead their race. "I came for a mate," Varick announced to the stunned pack, his voice booming like thunder that rolled across the valley and shook the very trees to their roots. "And I found a sovereign. This girl is the Lunar Sentinel, the protector of our kind. Anyone who ever laid a hand on her, anyone who ever made her sleep in the ash or called her a mutt, will answer to me with their life. Your pack is not worthy of her footprint. You have treated a goddess like a slave, and for that, your lineage is ended. From this day, your lands are forfeit, your titles are stripped, and your name is stricken from the annals of the wolf. You shall be forgotten, while she is immortalized. The Frost-Bane Pack shall exist no more, absorbed into my empire, and its leaders shall serve as the lowest laborers in the mines of the Obsidian Throne. You will work in the same darkness you tried to trap her in." Elara leaned her head against the king's chest, the golden eyes of her wolf finally shining through her own with a calm, terrifying intelligence. She wasn't a mutt. She was the end of their era and the beginning of a golden age. As they exited the hall, the stepmother begged for mercy, throwing herself at the king's boots, her finery covered in the same mud she had forced Elara to live in. Varick didn't even look back. He placed Elara on his charcoal black stallion and climbed up behind her, his arms a fortress around her. The former members of the Frost-Bane Pack watched in silence as their greatest treasure was carried away by the only man strong enough to hold her. The stepsisters were left in the mud of their own making. Their silken dresses ruined and their status vanished forever, while the girl from the cellar rode toward a throne made of stars and ancient iron. Elara looked back one last time, her eyes glowing with a promise of justice, and the village felt the first snow of a winter that would never end for those who had mistreated her. She was no longer Elara the Mutt. She was Elara the Eternal, the Queen of the Moon and the Star Iron Throne. Elara realized her worth far too late in the eyes of others, but for the king, she was the only light in the world. If you think the stepsisters got exactly what they deserved for their cruelty, and that Elara's transformation was the ultimate revenge, show your support for Elara by hitting that like button right now. It really helps our pack grow and tells the algorithm that we value true inner power over outward silk. And if you want to see Elara return to the pack as a queen and see what she does to the people who locked her away once she masters her sentinel powers and takes her place on the Obsidian Throne, make sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a chapter of this epic journey. How would you handle a betrayal like this from your own family? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next one.